Hi, I'm attorney Gregory Dell, joined today by attorney Cesar Gavidia, and we're going to talk about a common question that comes about, which is, can Unum Disability Insurance Company use their own hired doctors to deny long-term disability insurance claims? And Cesar, Unum's the world's largest group disability insurance company and individual. Well, they don't really sell a lot of individual, they're just the world's largest disability insurance company, and having over $1 billion in profit. So they're basically a monster. But with such a volume of cases and such experience in the long-term disability insurance world, how can they repeatedly go to their own employees, their own doctors, and use that as a reasonable basis to deny claims? Is that something that's legal, and do they do that?
Yeah, for a simple reason. I mean, they can do it because it's not illegal. And they can justify it by saying, well, we're entitled to do an independent investigation. We can have medical doctors who we consider totally independent and neutral. They're not going to, they're not going to have a stake in this game, and they're going to review your records, and they're going to do a fair and full assessment of everything. At least this is what they're describing.
Wait, but let me back. How is it independent if it's their in-house employed doctors?
Yeah, I mean, it isn't truly independent, but it's almost like they're saying, well, you can trust us. You can trust that this is what we're going to do. We're bound by the law, we're bound by regulations, but as we know, that's never stopped them. That's really never stopped their medical doctors from doing a sham review or a sham job.
So, I kind of get it in the initial application that they're going to use particularly in-house doctors, because if you equate it to like a health insurance company, if you have well, that's more of an appeal, but usually, a lot of these insurance companies, they do have in-house doctors. And at the initial level, it may be okay for them to go to their own in-house doctors if they have a doctor in that particular medical specialty. But how can a claimant truly get a fair shake from a doctor whose salary is paid by the company that's making the decision on the claim?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if in every case there is going to be a fair review conducted by that doctor. And look, we understand, look, being the largest disability insurance company, is it going to be cost effective for them to go out and hire a third-party doctor every single time? And even when you start hiring these outside doctors, just because they're outside of your company and you're paying them as a contractor, or you're paying a vendor who's then paying them, does that mean that they're not independent? I mean, we've seen reviews that are just as terrible from outside doctors from Unum as an internal review done by a doctor at Unum. And I've seen in many cases where there's been a review done by a doctor at Unum, and they've said, there is support here for the restrictions and limitations they're claiming, and there is support for the disability claim. And then they, in turn that report around to the claims examiner, and the claim is approved. But then 5 or 6 years later, or sometime later, there's another medical review done that says exactly the opposite of what that initial doctor at Unum said. So.
But we repeatedly see the same names of these doctors over at Unum. But what's disturbing, I think, is that you started off with this independent, which is why I jumped in right away, because when Unum gets the claim, they kind of have an initial roundtable. And we know this because we've handled thousands of these, and we get these claim files, and Unum keeps notes of what's going on. It's not a secret. It's not something they advertise, but it's not a secret as to, like, we discovered something that isn't known. Just from reviewing these files, we see that they have these roundtable meetings. And they'll have the claims person there, and they might have a nurse, and they might have a director of claims, and they all get around and they talk about the claim, and then they basically say, with some direction from the doctor, okay, here's what you're going to do, here's what we need, and then here's what you're going to do. So if the doctor is involved with the claims person and is reviewing, they're all talking about their strategy, even if they're talking about, hey, let's get some video surveillance of this person, there's already this perception of, it's not the point of view of like, okay, what are we going to do to get support for this claim? It's always more of what are we going to do to deny the claim,
right?
Per se. It's like not, the theme isn't, okay, we're all here to get as much support as we can for the claimant.
Yeah. We don't believe you have a disability till you've, jumped through, so many number of hoops and have, proven it to us. And that's where you kind of get into this really murky area is, proving to them what is that threshold standard that's going to satisfy their doctor, that's going to satisfy Unum to finally pay your disability benefits.
See, I think the more fair way for it to be done, and there's no regulations on this, is yes, Unum, it's fine, you have your in-house doctors. I think you should, because your claims people aren't qualified to make medical decisions. They'll always say that. We're not medically trained, we don't know what things are, so then they have to defer to a doctor. But if they defer to the doctor, which they should ask the doctor, what's going on here, what do you think? That in-house doctor has such a conflict of interest that he should not make it. If he thinks that the person potentially is not disabled, then the default for them should be, we need to refer out to somebody else so that we walk away from this. We're fair, we looked at it. If we think it's disabled, because a lot of claims it's a no-brainer. The person's disabled, the evidence there. But if you're a Unum doctor and you reach the conclusion to go, I'm not so sure on this one, then send it to somebody else and take yourself out of the mix. But yet, is that how you see things are commonly done at Unum?
Sometimes you'll see that done. The problem with that is that when they do send that out, and the medical doctor, he's still intimately involved with the claim. He's still intimately involved with that medical decision, because it's usually that medical director, that medical doctor who's sending the file out for that third-party review, and that third-party doctor's getting that internal medical doctor's report or assessment, or there's a list of questions that he says, I want you to answer these questions. So it's almost like there's already going to be this predetermined conclusion. It's not like they're stepping back to say, well, now this outside person's going to truly do a completely independent assessment. They're not going to see what our doctor wrote. Our doctor's not going to communicate any questions to them or anything like that. They're just going to do their own assessment to determine if the restrictions and limitations are supported, or that the symptoms are of such degree of severity that there's disability here and an inability to perform your job functions or occupational duties. So, it's really a complex issue.
Well, we talked about on the initial claim, it comes in and Unum reviews it. Now, a lot of what we see is these Unum denials, and they require an appeal because they're governed by ERISA. And when you submit an appeal, regardless of who was involved in the claim initially, whether the claims examiner or the doctor, a new person's supposed to look at it. And the law requires that a physician with the appropriate medical specialty to whatever the medical condition is should review the file. Do you more often than not still see Unum, even on an appeal, going back to their own in-house doctors to make a decision?
Depending on the governing law. If it's governed by ERISA, then they actually shouldn't be going back to their own internal physician, at least the one that...
Not the same one. I'm talking about a new doctor within the company.
They will go back to a new doctor within the company. They certainly will.
Okay.
But then also sometimes they do go outside at that point, because how many in-house doctors who aren't going to be involved or see that other doctor's opinion and report by just opening up the file. So they do sometimes go outside, but I've seen many times where they've gone back to someone in-house to do another assessment.
Yeah.
You'll even see sometimes a nurse will do an initial and then a physician will do the second.
And I think as we're filming this video in 2020, I'm seeing it even more that they're going to in-house doctors because it's a cost savings for them. Because you got a doctor who's on salary for $150,000 a year, and you send the file out to someone else to review, and you're in it for $1,000 to $5,000 for a review, and Unum would rather save the money than send it to someone else. So then they go to their own doctor, and again, you get into the whole bias. Now, their own doctor, more often than not, from what we see, is not going to reverse a prior doctor who's employed by the company, because these doctors, they don't have just appeal level doctors and initial level doctors. They go at both levels. So there's somewhat of an internal conflict there just among colleagues. Like, Bob, how did you find that this person wasn't disabled? And then Sally, who's reviewing it now on the appeal level, says, no, I think you were wrong. But yet they see each other every day. I just don't think it's going to work like that to that level. So, but no matter what the amount of the benefit is, I've had benefits $35,000, $40,000 a month, and Unum initial level, their own doctors. Second level appeal, their own doctors. It blows my mind how they cannot just say, well, let's have someone else look at them. Let's hire an independent, what's quasi-independent, because then they go to these outside companies. But, you know, we started this video was, can they use their own hired doctors to review claims, and is that fair? Well, yes, they can. Is it fair? No, I don't think it's fair. But I do think, Cesar, that that helps a claimant to make if they do lose the case, initial level, appeal level, to talk about a significant conflict of interest when the appellate judge is going to review that. And why is that helpful for a claimant?
Well, because, look, naturally kind of embedded in ERISA or in the law is this concept that you're entitled to a full and fair review. Okay, so if you're not getting that, then, you know, whether it's because Unum's just kind of keeping everything internal, not really going outside and seeking, you know, like you said, a quasi-independent review, and just kind of relying on these doctors who are kind of intercommunicating. There's always going to be, you know, how can you really trust that medical consultant, the second one, isn't going to see the report from the first one? How can you really trust that? I mean, all they have to do is stroke a few computer keys and they access it. So it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But people are entitled to full and fair reviews, and they have to be insistent that they get that.
So, Cesar, you know we have lots of videos about how to submit your application for Unum, appeal, strategies for Unum, reasons for denial. So there's lots of information available for you if you have a Unum disability policy. We always offer a free initial consultation, so we encourage you to contact either Cesar or myself or any of our disability lawyers. We help claimants throughout the country. No matter what stage you're at, we'll ask you to send us a copy of your disability policy, or if you've been denied, we'll ask you to send us a copy of your denial letter. We encourage you to spend a little bit of time on our website. You'll find lots of cases that we've handled against Unum, as well as summaries of lawsuits around the country. You'll find lots of reviews about Unum. You may even want to leave a review about your experience with Unum. We certainly appreciate that, as it helps other people as well who are dealing with Unum. And most importantly, we want you to just get yourself educated about how to handle Unum with a long-term disability claim, because the better educated you are, the better position you're going to be in to protect your long-term disability benefits. So should you need us in the future, we're here to help you, and we look forward to speaking with you soon. Thank you.